Dr. Val, and welcome to Unbroken. It's really an honor to have you here. So thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So part of Unbroken is talking about solutions, about health and healing. And so one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is because I understand that you're a naturopath doctor. I hope I said that correctly, but
yes,
if not, okay.
Yeah.
And so I know what that is a little bit, but for people who might not know or who might think that the only doctors are Western trained medical doctors, could you kind of describe what that is, what a naturopath is?
Sure. The easiest way to describe it is to go over the differences between the types of doctors that are licensed in most countries.
Okay.
And the first one, of course, is the MD. That's an allopath. And they have drugs and surgery in their bag of tricks. Right. Then we have DOs, which are doctors of osteopathy. So they have drug surgery and also manipulation of the spine and the bones and all that. And they also do some nutritional things. Then we have DCs, which are doctors of chiropractic, and they are mostly working on the spine, and also they deal with some botanical, and some of them go into homeopathy as well. Yeah. Then you have an OMD, which is an Oriental medical doctor, and that is Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And so they have a ton of botanicals that they deal with. And you have naturopaths. And a naturopath has a lot more tricks in their bag. So we have to conform to what the allopaths and the DOs do. So if you look at our statutes, they're almost identical. We have what's called standards of care, and we are licensed as general practice physicians. And so that's like, most MDs come out as general practice, and then they go back for specialties and things. And we have specialties as well. And we also do botanical medicine, homeopathy, Chinese medicine, and acupuncture. We do spinal adjustment. We do nutritional therapy, quantum energetics, energy medicine type things. We do Ayurveda. We do all kinds of things, basically. Whatever we're trained in, we are licensed to do. And so there's a lot of tricks in those bags, And the thing that's nice about doing naturopathic medicine is that we look at the whole person.
Yeah.
And so what we want to know is, where is this person at? Where do they need to get to, and how am I going to get them there? And each person is treated as an individual. We're not looking at the state of disease. We're looking at how do we return them to health, which is opposite of what MDs and DOs do.
Right.
And of course, there are exceptions. There are holistic doctors that are MDs and DOs as well. So I'm not condemning, either one of those branches of medicine. We each have our things to do. The problem is that a lot of the holistic docs in allopathic and osteopathic medicine get penalized for doing anything that's holistic.
Right.
And I have friends in, both sides, and they have to tread a thin line there and be very careful when they're prescribing anything that's holistic. And, it varies state by state as well. So basically, when I look at a person, I know where their health is supposed to be. And so then it's up to me to figure out where they are. So I would tell them, okay, we're going to make a map, and I'm going to put the X where you are, and then I'm going to put arrows to where we're going to go once you tell me what you're willing to do. Because if I prescribe acupuncture for someone and they're terrified of needles, that's not going to work, is it?
Yeah.
So, some I might need to do homeopathy with, some I might have to do more chiropractic type adjustments. Some I might have to go very gently with nutritional stuff. It just depends. So, my job as a naturopath is to figure out what's the best pathway for them with their full cooperation.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I have fired patients for not doing the plan that we came up with. And the reason I did... Go ahead.
I just want to say, I find that distinction really significant because
Mhm.
you're right. What MDs or Western medicine, they are really trained to look at and find disease, right? So that
Yes.
really struck me when you said you look at health, you look at wholeness. I think just the way that this is looked at can affect the outcome, right?
Of course.
So if you're
Yeah.
focused on disease, and then from what I know from MDs and Western medicine is there's a lot of addressing symptoms, but not the root cause either. So
Right.
it sounds like from your perspective, you're looking at, and also that you're looking at someone as an individual is so different than that system, which lumps everyone in boxes and categories, and it's a diagnosis based rather than a individual human being based. So I just wanted to emphasize that. I think that's really significant about a naturopath versus an MD.
Yeah, it is. You know, I've gotten a lot of patients in my practice that were given up on. One had been to 35 doctors in 1 year,
Oh my.
and she was blacklisted because she'd been to so many doctors that nobody could help her. And I got her feeling better in 2 weeks. And she was like, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Because I listened to you." You know, and we know what the problems are. You know, I looked at the history. I actually take time to read the history. I had one person brought in a cardboard box full of stuff, and I got more movement out of her in 1 week, according to her psychologist, than he'd gotten in 20 years. And he said, "How'd you do that?" I said, "Well, first of all, I read an entire cardboard box full of medical records."
So
And
with
then
this woman that you mentioned, if I may,
uh
what was it that no one was able to catch in the Western medical field, and what was it that you were able to catch and help her? What was
it's a combination. Yeah, it's looking at the process, you know, what made the person be that way, and then what did that actually cause when it happened. And so you do what I call a backwards algorithm. You know, you look at where they're at and you go, okay, there are 10 things that could have caused this. And so you examine each one of those. Is it this? No. Is it that? No. Is it this? No. Is it this? Maybe. Okay, so then you might get that 10 down to 7. And then you might get it down to 3. And then out of the 3, they're usually fairly close. So you pick which one you think is going to be able to get rid of the cause. And at that point, you implement it. And if it doesn't work, you go to the other 2. But what I do, I learned a long time ago that in order to heal somebody, you have to look at that whole individual mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Yeah. If you don't address all 4 of those things, you're not going to get a complete healing. So when you address all 4, you can have miracles happen. And I can't tell you how many times somebody would come in with something severe that nobody could help with, and we'd get it fixed, and then they go, "Did you know this was going to happen?" And I'd say, "Nope, I hoped it would. I prayed for you, but I had no idea that was going to happen." I mean, that's really a miracle. And it's really because of the shotgun therapy. You know, I throw everything at them that I know is going to work. And I don't care which one is the most important one. You know, I'm not researching on it. I'm interested in helping the person to heal. And so because I'm also an empath and intuitive, I can feel in their body where they've got a problem. And so I'm like the sounding board. They don't even have to say anything to me. They can sit down and I'll just kind of feel it. And then I'll start asking them the questions. And they go, "Well, how did you know that?" "Well, because I'm an empath." You know, so that makes it much easier as well. I don't have to sit there and think about it and, you know, flip through 1,000 books to try to figure out what's going on, because I know what different things feel like in your body, because I've been through a lot myself. Yeah. So that makes you a better doctor. You know, you have to be to get yourself out of it. So it's basically, you know, looking at that person, figuring out what's going to work for them. Like I said, I'm not going to tell them to do something that they're not going to do. Right. So I have to have an agreement. You know, I would tell them on the first visit, "I'm on your team, okay? I'm not better than you. I just happen to like doing this stuff, and I'm good at it. So I'm on your team. Who else do we have on the team? And, you know, you're the head of the team. So you tell me what you want to do and what you're willing to do, and we'll talk about it. And I'll tell you what the priorities are.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody's got a heart problem, but they're worried that, you know, they came in because they want Viagra because they've got a new girlfriend, you know, I'm not going to give them Viagra. It ain't happening. You know, instead, I'm going to fix the heart problem.
Right.
And, you know, it's kind of a silly example, but it happened many times, you know.
So I really think that's another really important point that you're making, which I have not really heard anyone talk about before, which is you really see what you work with people where they're at and what are they willing to do. So what that reminds me of is something about myself, where anytime I was prescribed pills or supplements, I would get them, but I won't take them for whatever reason. Like, I'm not a good pill or supplement taker. I forget, I just don't do it. So no one bothered to ask me that. So that's just really interesting. And when I've seen Chinese medicine doctors, I also will not brew that tea. It's like there's certain things that are too much. I mean, it's silly, right? But that is.
But that's you.
That's me. So that is.
Yeah, I would put you on an IV. I would give you everything IV. You'd come in once a week or more. I had one guy that came in 5 times a week for IVs, and he was serious. I mean, we're talking way serious. And I got him out of his chronic hepatitis.
Yeah.
And
I would do that. I would come in for IVs, but I wouldn't boil my own teas and do all that process. I intend to, and I just don't. Right. So.
Yeah. So that's what I mean. You have to meet the person where they are. And same thing with, you know, there's been, you know, the big brouhaha in the chats about, you know, germ theory versus terrain theory.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you know, I deal in both. Why do I deal in both? Because you have to meet somebody where they're at. You cannot beat them over the head with the bloody stump of their arm that you just ripped off, trying to force your opinion on them. You know, that doesn't work. They'll run screaming out the door. You know.
So by that you mean you're not going to force feed them terrain theory that they've never heard of and will think you're crazy and.
They think I'm crazy enough as it is. You know, I can't tell you how many husbands came in after a month and said, when my wife came home after the first visit, I thought you were crazy. But they're like, well, now, wow, the difference is just amazing. Yeah. And they're like, I have to admit, you were right.
You know, I most kind of recently learned about terrain theory. I was brainwashed into germ theory myself most of my life. So if I could ask you just for a moment to describe those two things, because some people listening might not know what we're talking about.
Sure. Germ theory was promoted by Louis Pasteur, and he was backed by big money. And so what he said is there's germs everywhere and they're going to kill us, basically. Okay, his rival at the time was Antoine Beauchamp. Beauchamp was the finder of terrain theory. And what he said was, everything is within us, just like all the answers, you know. And so if your terrain, your milieu, your body is not cleansed and detoxed, and if it's not fed and watered properly, then you're going to have a breakdown in the terrain. And all of these cells in our body that have these different functions will break down into different things. And so it could be viruses, bacteria, funguses, you know, it could be anything. So yeah, there are things out there like bacteria and fungi, and you know, we can see them under the microscope. Whether they're viruses or not, that's a big question. But there are parasites that contain all of these things too. So you want to get parasites out of your body as well. They've plagued mankind since the beginning. So, you know, which is better for the patient? It depends on what they're willing to do. You know, the basic thing is, if you keep your body with the tissues in an alkaline state and with the urine in an acidic state to a certain point, you know, there's times when you have to use baking soda to fix that. That's a terrain protocol. Or, you know, eat a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables and things like that. So terrain theory gives you more responsibility for your own health. With germ theory, puts the responsibility on the doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
And
is
so you're going to,
which is a paradigm that we have in our world about everything, right? Everything's
yeah,
external
there's
rather
some
than
authority that you have to go
internal.
to, right?
So with
Well,
terrain theory, I've heard something, tell me what you think of this. I've heard it described as, so if your terrain, if you're not taking care of yourself, you don't have the right nutrition and rest and all that, then it's like your body is filled with garbage. So then what they call viruses would be like the cockroaches feeding on the garbage, but they wouldn't be there feeding on that if you didn't have the garbage.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And the important thing to note too is on his deathbed, Louis Pasteur said, Beauchamp is right.
Right. But
so,
as you and I both know, that would not serve the cabal and the control system as well as Pasteur's
big pharma,
theory. Right. And you mentioned bacteria, and something occurred to me. A long time ago, I saw an interesting TED Talk, and this woman was saying how much bacteria coexist with us inside our body and around our body, without whom we would not be alive.
Right.
So
they create vitamins for us,
yeah,
and enzymes and things.
So bacteria is not necessarily a bad word.
We have a lot more bacteria in our bodies than we have cells.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
And so you want a good balance of your bacteria, and that's what the whole prebiotic and probiotic stuff is about.
Okay.
You want the right bacteria in your intestines in order to produce the things that we need. So bacteria are not all bad. However, bacteria have been more responsible for more deaths than anything else in the history of mankind. Because if you don't get some kind of correct treatment and you've gotten a load of bacteria into your terrain, and your terrain cannot fix itself because it's poor terrain, then you're going to die if you don't get some kind of treatment.
So it's more the imbalance than the bacteria itself.
Right. Okay. And my question has been, okay, so we know that all these different herbs and different things that we can do can stop a bacterial infection or a fungal infection. But what if it's not doing what we think it is? Because we're saying that it works for this, that, or the other based upon the science that we know, which has all been a lie.
Right.
But nobody has actually investigated, wait a minute, how do these things actually work? Maybe it's not what we think at all. Maybe they're affecting the plasma field. Who knows? We don't know. So I think that that's a whole area that needs to be investigated, because it could be something completely different than we think, even though the experiments are reproducible, for what we think is going on. But my sense is that there's a lot more going on than that.
So describe for people who may not know what plasma is or what a plasma field is.
Okay, I'm not the person to talk to about that. The plasma field is energy. You want to talk to somebody that really deals with utilizing the plasma field with these different machines and things that really are quite remarkable. But plasma is an energy that we have not explored that much, and it's part of who we are. It may actually be the spark that gives us life. So, do we need to pay attention to that? Yeah. And I think the more investigations need to be done on that.
Yeah. There's a lot of occulted knowledge that has been kept from us. Occulted just meaning it's secret, right? So there's a lot we don't know, and, a lot that has been used against us because we don't know. And so, what that sparked in me is, I remember talking to you about this in the past. You talked about, we have different bodies, right? Mm-hmm. We have a physical body, and then we have other bodies. Could you say a little bit about that? Because I'm sure with healing and health, I'm guessing you can heal any of the bodies or different parts, different, levels of it.
Yeah, you can heal different levels. There's the basic 7 bodies. We all think it's just the physical body.
Yeah.
This is it. No, that's the grossest body. And so if there's a problem in the physical body, you have to approach it on the gross level, which means you have to give it what it needs. If you need calcium, homeopathic calcium is not going to give you what you need. It might help you metabolize it better, but it's not going to give you the calcium. So what you want to do is give somebody the calcium supplement. or have them eat some vegetables that contain more calcium, or, whatever. So that's one body, and that's the body that we see and that we think is the be all end all. The second thing is, okay, you're looking also at the etheric body, which is the blueprint. So a lot of disease happens in the etheric body because something happened energetically there that really was not good for that person. Maybe they got attacked, maybe they let something in, maybe, well, there's a lot of maybes, so I'm not going to go into all that. There's just something happens in the etheric body that kind of smudges an area of the blueprint. And so then things don't work the way that they should. So then the next thing is that you have a mental body. Now, men normally have the mental body more built than the women do. They used to, but now women are kind of, coming up on that end as well. The mental body is something that you need really developed in order to manifest. And also the emotional body. Women are normally more developed on the emotional body than men, but again, we're kind of changing on that a little bit. So you want mental and emotional together as part of manifestation. And then you're going to go up further. You have other bodies. You have a celestial body, which is really important. You're looking at levels above your head, basically. So if you look at the human body as you see depicted in a lot of meditation books, there's all these rings of color around, and each ring is a different color, corresponds to a different body. Mm-hmm. And so you have your pranic energy body as well, which you might see as white, or you might see it as a really intense yellow, which is very handy, by the way. I've talked to you about that before, where I was able to discover what was going on and get myself out of trouble because I saw the energy body. And so there's all these different bodies that we need to kind of focus on when we're looking at healing. If somebody has a cancer, that's something that started pretty much in their emotional body and their mental body. Could have started in the etheric, but usually it starts with anger and resentment. And if you can't get the person out of whatever it is that they're angry and resentful on, you pretty much can't heal them. So, I never focused on cancer in my practice. There's plenty of other people that means a lot to them, and so they go and do that. I was never interested. And the reason is because most of the patients that I saw that had cancer would not give up their anger and resentment. And then they pulled guilt into it too.
What's the link between anger and resentment and cancer? What's the causality there?
Well, what it does is it eats you away from the inside. Okay, it causes your cells to go haywire. Cancer is our own cells.
Right.
But what happens in a cancerous state is, normally your cell's going to divide in two. In a cancerous state, it's going to divide into 7 or 8, and they're all going to be malformed. And then they're going to go, and if they have enough chromosomes to reproduce, then they will reproduce like that, 7 or 8. This is why tumors grow so very quickly. Right. And so it's your own cell that's gone haywire. Why does it go haywire? Because what you feed it is going to make a big difference. So if you have someone who's got a really lousy terrain, like maybe they chain smoke and they eat nothing but crap, they eat from fast.
Uh-oh. She froze, or did I freeze? Guys, either I'm frozen or she is.
Putting all this into their body, so they have made it so the body cannot survive properly. It can't heal itself. Bodies are meant to heal themselves. We are self-regenerating. So when you have someone that has a cancer, it's going to start in that, in the mental and/or emotional body. And usually it's both, because it's highly charged. Like somebody rips you off and, you're homeless. Okay, so you resent them, you hate them, and they hate builds and builds and builds, and you want to take revenge. Okay, if you can't drop that, then that's the first inroad into a cancerous state. Now,
Val, what that reminds me of for some reason is that Japanese scientist Emoto who did
mhm,
that work with water,
yes,
where he fed it different words like hate, love,
yeah,
vibrational stuff, and then he froze it. And we looked at the crystals, the ones with love and with, good positive vibrations
right,
were very beautiful and harmonious. And the other ones, like you said, they were off, they were distorted. And
yeah,
so being that we're mostly made of water, right? So
yeah,
I'm hearing you say that, and I'm thinking about that resentment and that hate distorting the very person's molecules in their body,
yes,
and then the cancer, right? That
yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
Hmm.
And so that's, and I'm not that patient. So I don't have the patience to deal with cancer patients. And I recognized that about myself, very early on, because I had to deal with a lot of them when I was a nurse, before I became a naturopathic physician. I was an ER and ICU nurse.
Yeah.
And then when I got hurt in my back, I ended up being also home health and home hospice. So I've seen a lot of that stuff. And by the way, you can smell cancer. It's not just dogs that can smell it.
Wow.
Once you've been around it a while, you can smell it, and I can't describe it. It's a weird smell, but it's basically that your body's eating itself.
Yeah.
And it's malformed, and it can go very quickly in some people. Depends on their level. And the other thing too,
I have felt that actually when I'm in a state of distress, of sometimes like I'm ruminating and I'm upset.
yep,
I literally feel like my body is eating itself on the inside. So that's just interesting that you said it that way.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's very important for us to keep our vibes high.
Yeah.
And not get into this whole anger, resentment thing, and just
So it's
let it go.
important to be responsible, accountable, and aware of our emotional state. And if it's gone, I mean, we get triggered, okay. But then I guess what you're saying is it's really important to address that so you don't continue in that negative emotional state and cause yourself a physical illness.
Right. Because it can be caused. And, if people think that it can't be caused that way, think back to when you were a kid and you didn't want to go to school. Could you pop a fever? I did. I could pop a fever, and my mother was an RN, she could tell, right? She thought. And I could pop a fever and stay home and just read a book or whatever I wanted to do, because I could actually make myself look physically ill. Yeah. And so, if I could do that when I just wanted to take a day off, part of the problem with the whole anger and resentment thing is we turn a lot of that inwards.
Yeah.
And like if you look at people that have MS, multiple sclerosis, that's anger turned inward.
Wow.
And they're the nicest people you could ever meet. They're so sweet. Yeah. And they wouldn't hurt a flea, but they have no problem hurting themselves.
Right. I've heard that said about depression as well.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's turned inwards.
It's people. I've worked with people who cut themselves and mutilate them, and so they even go so far in that depression as to inflict physical violence on their body.
Yeah, yeah, it's a deep-seated hatred turned inwards, and so it's a lot to try to work with all that. And the other problem with that is that the malevolent beings in the universe that work against us can go up to our auras, and they can play them like an organ. And they can actually make you think lots of things. They can put you into depression if you're not aware of this kind of stuff. The main thing is always ask, where's this feeling coming from?
Yeah.
And I've helped people when I've been out shopping or something, and teenagers are very susceptible to this, where they'll just be so furious and angry, and the parents aren't helping. They build on that anger, because they have no idea what's going on. And so I'll go, introduce myself and say, can I talk to your child for a moment? And they go, okay. And I tell them maybe I can help. And I'd sit down with them and I'd say, what's going on? You're angry? And they'd say, yes. And they're all sullen and, withdrawn and everything. And I go, what are you angry about? And they go, I don't know. And I go, oh, really? Well, when you're normally angry, when somebody makes you angry, do you know what you're angry about? And they say, yes. then how come you don't know why you're angry now? And they kind of sit and they start to look up. And I go, it's not yours then, is it? And then the light dawns. And then they start to smile. And it's like, you're just sensitive. That's why people turn to drugs and alcohol and, some extreme adventures, because they don't want to feel what they're feeling.
Yeah.
They're empaths, basically.
I've always told people, don't believe everything you think. Right?
Yeah. Right.
But that's an interesting concept. I want to highlight this because I think this might be new for some people, that there are negative entities. They're non-corporeal, so they're not in a body. Right. But I guess in our aura or in one of these bodies that you mentioned, they can sort of tickle there and insert thoughts that are not really our own. I have experienced that a lot myself. I've gotten to the point now today where I can tell a thought that's mine and a thought that's not mine, which is very helpful.
Well, and they'll go after your astral body too. I forgot to mention that one. When you dream, that's your astral body.
Oh.
And the more developed your astral body is, the more technicolor dream you have and the more real it is. But everybody has it. Everybody dreams, even if they don't remember it. So they can also attack you in the astral. So you're sleeping, you're having a dream, you don't realize what they just did to you.
Is there a way for us to protect ourselves there?
Yeah, there's all kinds of protective things that you can do. One of the things is to have a talk with your highest self and say, look, if I'm going to go through the astral, get me through it quick. Huh. You don't have to hang around in the lower realms. The lower realms of the astral are hell. Right. And they're spilling over onto Earth. They have been for quite some time.
Yes.
So as we're, raising our frequencies so that we can go up to a higher dimension, we still have to go through these other layers of the astral. And it's horrific. You don't want to spend any time there.
Right. Right.
Nobody in their right mind wants to spend their time there. The psychopaths like it,
right?
Because they're nuts, basically.
Well, I think because they're detached from their higher selves and from their soul and heart. And so that's all that there is to them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, to heal the person, you have to heal all parts of them. Otherwise, I can tell you that I have known for a long time that you can heal somebody with a touch. And now I know you don't even have to touch them. But back then, when I was a kid and things, I did a lot of healings with touch. And then I realized when I was in my 30s, I think, hey, I'm taking people's lessons away. Maybe they need these lessons to become whoever they're supposed to be. And so I quit doing that. And a lot of people love to do touch, hands-on healing and stuff. And I always ask them, did you think about maybe they need that in order to
the way I'm translating this is you don't want to be a savior, right?
Right.
You don't want to just go and take whatever it is from them. You rather would give them the tools to do it themselves, because then they would be empowered, right?
Exactly.
If you just took it from them, they wouldn't learn why this even happened, and they would probably go right back to the same state.
Yeah, they would go back to their same habits. And the thing too is, it was pointed out to me many years ago that when you take away their illness instantaneously, it's not that it can't be done, but when it's done, it's akin to murdering them. It's that serious, because you have taken away whatever the lesson was for them and whoever's around them to learn. And we don't have the right to do that. If we want sovereignty, we have to give sovereignty.
Yep.
So we don't get to interfere. It's like, I'm happy to help people when they ask me for help, but I don't usually run around volunteering.
Right.
Because I don't want to get swept into their karma. I got enough of my own, thank you very much. And I just soon not create any more.
So the sovereignty thing and the self-responsibility that we're talking about. So how does this relate to these negative entities that can affect us, can put thoughts in us, or maybe, I don't know if they can also enter our bodies and do things. So
they can, yeah, they can if you leave them an opening.
So that's where the self-responsibility part is not to
Yeah.
have an opening. Okay, go ahead.
Right. Right. Like people that are doing drugs and alcohol and stuff, and especially if they get blitzed, then they're in trouble because they're wide open when that happens.
Yeah.
And so, it's important for us to take that full responsibility for our lives, because the highest self will let you do that. It'll let you do it until you hit rock bottom and you realize that, hey, that's not the way to go. In the meantime, there's plenty of people that have gotten possessed in bars. They've gotten blotto and they're passed out, and there's plenty of other spirits around who want to be back in a body.
I'm going to guess that when a person drinks a lot of alcohol and blacks out, and they don't remember, that maybe in that time they don't remember they were possessed by a different entity who was driving that vehicle, right? And that's why they call alcohol spirits.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. And it can happen with all kinds of things. Like there's a lot of people that take sleep aids, different drugs, and same thing happens to them. And there's some drugs that are for blood pressure, for instance, that can actually do the same thing to you.
What about anesthesia?
Yeah, anesthesia can do that too. So you need to protect yourself before you go in.
Okay.
Make sure the highest self is aware of what's going on. Same thing with hypnosis. You want to make sure your highest self is always aware before you enter into something that's going to take away your consciousness.
So what do? Do you just talk to your higher self, or how do you?
I talk to my highest self, and it gives me different things. Like my protection is pretty long. And, some people just say, oh, I'm protected, and they walk off and they think they're fine. Well, that's fine if nobody's attacking you. But if you're getting attacked from all sides because of what your mission is, that's not going to work. So then what you do is you develop some kind of protection ritual, if you want to call it that, a prayer, whatever, a command or a decree. But what you do is you figure out what is going to work for you. And if it's not enough, then you go back to the drawing board and, work on it and keep working on it until you get something that works. And it's like, with all these energetic changes that we've been going through, and with the attacks that have come, over the last couple of months, I've watched people around me that are going down for the count.
Yeah, me too.
And I don't get sick, and I don't get bothered. I sleep just fine. I don't get attacked. And the whole reason is because I've had to deal with this stuff before. And so I've developed my own protection prayer or command. And it works great for me. I'm very happy that I did it, because I used to be fighting entities all the time. And, I've done exorcisms and all this kind of stuff too. I don't do it anymore. It's like, no, that's not fun. There's plenty of other people that want to do that stuff. They can go do it. But what I discovered through doing all these things is that, you are responsible for yourself, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So,
I have found it to be true for myself that if I allow myself to go into, let's say, a victim state, right? Or some kind of emotional state where I'm blaming and I'm furious and whatever, I have experienced entities being able to come in from that as well. And so it took me many times to learn the cost of allowing myself to go down that emotional slope. So nowadays, I will put a big stop sign, as soon as I feel like I'm doing that, I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, because that's going to make me vulnerable to much worse stuff. And then it's like, I'm going to fall all the way down here, and then I have to climb all the way back up here. So why do that, right?
Right. And damage happens along the way. Yeah, that's the thing. A lot of people think that they're powerful because they feel the power of anger building up in them and they want to fight. And it's like, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your energy. And if you're angry, then spirits that love that and want to push you to be more angry are going to jump into you.
Yeah.
And they're going to try to take over.
I would almost see anger as an alarm bell. So you don't leave the alarm bell going off forever.
Right.
You hear it, you turn it off, and you do something about it, right?
Yeah. Well, anger is good to move you.
Yeah.
But as you know, in psychology, if you got somebody that's depressed, you don't really worry about them until they start getting angry. because then they have the energy to commit suicide or homicide.
Right.
And most are going to go for suicide, but that's the danger point. So anger is a useful energy,
Yeah.
as long as you understand how to use it and you don't direct it at someone or at yourself.
Right. You know, I myself, because of the severe abuse and torture that I endured, when I did my healing work, I realized I had so much rage, so much anger in me. And so for a situation like that, there's just a lot of past anger and rage that's in there. And so what I figured out to do about that is I joined a boxing gym and I started boxing and I started punching and punching. So I knew that I had to release this pent up anger. It was there from all the things that had been done to me. And so rather than attack someone else or go at myself, I did something that externalized it and got it out. And after a certain amount of years of that, there was a moment when I felt like, I did it. It's out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had a lot of anger too. I used to love to fight.
Me too.
And and that was, one of the things that I had to deal with. And I worked on it for a number of years. And, it took me into shamanism, and I did things nobody in their right mind would do.
So did I.
Yeah. And it was all, part of the learning experience of doing the shamanic training. And, part of what they do in that kind of stuff is they put your life in danger, and you're either going to live through it or you're not. And when you live through it, then you level up, basically. And so I did a lot of those things, and it was all really directed at dealing with the anger that I had within me. And so now I can step back, be the observer and step back and just look at people. And it just kind of I feel sad, when people try to argue with me about stuff. I feel really sad for them because I recognize that, and they're not going to get around me. So even my genius late husband couldn't win an argument with me. So it's like I just kind of sit back and go, wow, that's so sad. I feel their anger. I know they're very upset, and it's useless.
Yeah, and I call it throwing a fish hook out. Do I bite? No, I'm not. I've learned not to bite.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
when you do, you just get reeled into the other person's experience, and emotions and drama, and then you're there, and then you're in that negative vibration, and then it feels crappy in the body, and then there's openings for the entities. It's just absolutely horrible for us, right? So my motivation is I don't want to take myself down that way. I don't want to become ill. I don't want to have to get entities, because then I have to get them out. Then I have to get better, right? So
well, and the thing too is if people would just work on their egos. And, that there's a whole discipline in doing that, and people don't understand the ego is meant to be the servant of the body. That's it. It's an autopilot. It's to keep you from doing stupid stuff like running off the cliff or, walking into a fire or, jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. That's the only role of the ego.
It's survival. Survival.
That's it. But along the way, throughout the many centuries, the ego has kind of been left to do whatever it wants because the spirits did not want to stay in the body. We came from heaven and we come into this and we're like, oh, hell no, I'm getting out of here. And so then the ego was taking over, and it thinks that it is the sovereign being of the body, but it is not, and it will get you in trouble. And so the way to deal with that is to actively work on getting your ego in the proper place. And I was working on that too when I was working on the anger. And at one point, I worked on it so well that I actually threw my ego out of my body and saw it. It stood at the foot of my bed and tried to get back in. And I was like, no, ain't happening. And I sent it away, and it was gone for 2 years. And then I realized that if I'd had the ego back in the body, I wouldn't have gone through a couple of the things that I went through. And so I let it back in its proper place.
Right. I think that's the way I see it as well. I see the ego as a servant to the body, but also to the spirit, to the soul. It's an interface. We're in a physical body, so we need something to, work that angle, but it should be. So I think the solution for me has been to always follow my divine guidance, to always follow my higher self and source. Yeah. That's where I get my instruction. And then the ego is obeying that instruction, because and so I've thought about this, and I think the psychopaths, what has happened with them is that they're severed from their higher self, from the divine, from that. So they operate only and exclusively from their ego, and the ego is always going to be service to self. But if your ego is the servant of your higher self, then you're going to be service to others. Yeah, exactly. And the other point too is people think that ego is the personality. It is not. Right. The personality is completely different. And so, they'll make all these judgments on other people saying, oh, they've got this ego, if they've got that ego. Well, the truth is the ego can either be full of itself or it can be not enough. And so you have a lot of people who are heavily controlled by their egos who think they are not enough and they will never be enough and they're no good. They've taken all those things that have been said to them since they were a child, and they believe that. So the ego covers the entire gamut. That's a really good point. I love that. Thank you for saying that, because I've heard it said that the ego, makes you feel like you're special. So you can feel like you're special by being above others, but you can also feel like you're special by being nothing. Yes. Being different in that you're not as good, right? Yeah. Yeah. So in either case, it's still the ego in control. And it's only an autopilot. So why would you let that be in control? Right. Really, so that's really the first step to sovereignty. And once you get the ego under control, then you can start moving into taking responsibility for your life. And, right now we got a planet full of people that have no clue and don't want to take responsibility for their lives. Right. And that's a problem. Well, it takes courage. It's easier, and courage is a higher vibration, right? And cowardice is a lower vibration. And somehow it's easier because it takes some kind of effort. Now, I would rather put in that effort and live in a good way than be miserable because I don't want to expend a little bit of work on, and that's where I think shadow work comes in too. Yeah, shadow work is very important. And, stopping yourself right at the moment when you're having some kind of a negative emotion come up and going back and finding out, what is this coming from? And, what am I going to do about it? And do I want this anymore? And the answer is no, of course you don't, because it feels crappy. So you deal with it. And that's, part of dealing with your ego is doing the shadow work. It's all very important. And, another part of it is retrieving your soul pieces, because the soul pieces will fly off when you've been traumatized and the soul thinks that you're dying. Yes. And these pieces will just fly off and they'll be somewhere in the metaverse, and maybe in a different dimension. So the whole soul retrieval thing is about bringing back these pieces of your soul so that you can be whole, because we've all been fragmented. And, when I've done soul retrieval on people, sometimes I see that there are thousands of pieces like a shattered mirror. And, you got to go find them. And then you have to make an agreement between that piece and the person to do what that piece needs in order to stay there, which could be something really simple. Yeah. Maybe they need an ice cream once a week. Yeah. Maybe they need to go to the park. Who knows? But they're happy to be back with the person. Yeah, no, I really, I love that concept of soul retrieval. And I know it because I studied with shamans myself in the Amazon. And it actually connects to psychology models, which they see trauma is like you said, you can throw this big rock at a mirror and it just shatters into all these pieces. You know how they don't fall off, but they're separate. Yeah. So in psychology, it's not called soul retrieval, but it's called fragmentation. But it's the same thing, right? And so different parts of you do, in one model of psychology that I kind of like, they see it as parts of us. So these fragments are different parts, and some of them will hold a lot of the trauma. And so they will be somewhere else. So like when you said you bring it back, and I've done that, right? So when I've brought some of those pieces back, what I've had to do is heal that piece, that fragment, as she comes back, because that piece held a ton of trauma. And so I have to feel it and remember it, put myself back together, and then release the trauma. And then what I've found is when I do that work, let's say it's a very, very traumatized part, when that part is healed, say it's a child part, what I get is the organic child that would have been before the trauma. So I might get that playfulness and that joy and that vulnerability that children are, right? So when you heal the traumatized part, you restore them and they become an ally in you, right? So
they fit back in. And, one of the ways that you do soul retrieval, when you get the piece, you bring it back and you wash it in rainbow light. Mm-hmm. And you're clearing all of the trauma for it. Just makes it easier, And then when you get it back in the body, you can have the memories, but you don't have the trauma associated with it. I mean, there's lots of different ways to diffuse the hot button of the trauma. My favorite one is holographic memory resolution, but that is separate from doing soul retrieval. And, sometimes people would come into my office and sit down. I'd be doing the initial intake, and I could see that what they actually needed was more on the psychological part or the shamanic part. And so I would talk to them about that. And I would say, you can either have me do it, or you can have, whoever your popular shaman is in your town. And, I live in Sedona, so there's plenty of them. They're all over the place.
Yeah, they are.
And everybody loves to do that kind of stuff because it is so dramatic. And so, sometimes I would look at that and say, well, okay, we're going to clean you up on your diet on this end to support you as you go through this other stuff, but you really need to heal the psychological trauma first. Otherwise, you're going to keep hurting yourself, So that's all part of it. And that's basically what naturopaths excel at. We look at the entire body, at the entire person through all the layers of the bodies and, try to see, how can we help this person be whole? That's what it's really about. That's what holistic medicine is about.
Yeah. And I'm thinking that we are heading towards that. We are heading towards a medicine because modern medicine is deliberately reductionistic. It splits us, it doesn't see the big picture because of course there's a profit margin in managing illness rather than healing it, right?
Yeah, so we need to go back to the old day where you paid the doctor every month or every week or whatever. And, if you got sick, you stopped the payments. Of course, that would be a little difficult to go right into right away because people are too sick now.
Yeah.
But once everybody's well, then that should be the way it is. You don't see the doctor unless you're sick. And at that point, you stop the payments.
Yeah. Well, I've always asked, like I said, I don't take pills, but I know that people that do, and like my father, for example, has taken an antidepressant for 35 years. And I've said to him, well, obviously it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because if it worked, you wouldn't have to keep taking the pill, right?
Right.
But the mentality isn't that. So people don't even understand that. Yeah.
Well, and they don't realize that when you're taking something like an antidepressant, what you're doing is depleting your own neurotransmitters.
Yeah. Because
95% of your neurotransmitters are stored in your gut, not in your head. Right. Yeah. And they are depleted by things like an improper diet, by alcohol, by tobacco, by over-the-counter drugs like Tylenol or aspirin. They're depleted by high stress levels.
Yeah, fear.
Fear, all kinds of things.
And I know that antidepressants also contain a ton of fluoride, which calcifies, your pineal gland and
Yeah. So really, doing what we're doing now as far as life force restoration goes is we're basically working on helping people to get back to the natural human.
Yeah.
Where we can stop all this stuff that's been foisted on us, all of the poisons and everything else. I mean, it's in our food, it's in the air, it's in the water. We're pretty resilient. We're still here.
Considering we've been actively poisoned, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally.
Mentally, emotionally, psychically.
All of it, right?
Yeah.
Energetically.
Spiritually,
Yeah. Because you know what? I've always seen it as this. Health is the natural way.
Yes.
It's natural to be healthy. It's unnatural to be ill. But
Yeah.
that's a condition that's been created over many decades and hundreds of years. And here we are today where the norm is actually to be ill, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, if you look around at the people that you know, how many of them are actually really healthy?
Yeah.
You know, pretty much everybody's taking something, you know, even if it's just vitamins, you know, why are we taking those things? Well, we're taking them because we can't get what we need from the food.
Right. Because the soil is so depleted. Yeah.
Right. So, you know, being healthy encompasses everything. We have to make the world healthy in order for us to be healthy.
So we could say that we have to make the terrain of the world healthy so that it supports our health.
Right. Yeah, we're tied to it. You know, we are not
part
separate.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why it's very important to teach children, especially, how to grow food.
Yes. Yes.
And, you know, not so much heavy on the rules, rather just let them kind of fool around with it. Yeah. You know, they can watch you plant things and talk to the plants and things like that, and they'll come up with ways to make the stuff grow a lot better.
Yeah.
And, you know, teach them not only that, but the icky part too. Like, you know, use a composting toilet. And then you compost it all. You know, you put things back into the earth. Right. It's like, you know, and when people used to do that as a matter of course, we used to get silver and gold into our bones, which we need for health, just a little bit, you know, not a huge bit, but we got it because it was in the animal bones, and the animal bones were dried and crushed and put back into the soil. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, we take dead bodies and dispose and burn them or dispose them in some other way. That's correct. Oh, that's interesting. But that makes sense to me because it's that cycle of life, right?
Right. We're part of it. You know? And if we're not part of it, then we're not here.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Dr. Val, this has been such a great conversation. I have enjoyed every minute of it. You are brilliant. You are informed. You're funny. I mean, I thank you so much for being here with me today. And I hope that you would agree to come back and have another conversation.
Oh, sure. Anytime. And it's been a great pleasure for me as well, Max.
Well, thank you so much. And until next time.